Hello and welcome to the 6th reading group series of Karl Marx's 18th Brumaire. We have a very full panel here today. We have what the fuck? There we go. Sorry, mix up on my audio. So, and we've got a very full panel here today. All the way. So let's start up let's start bottom right. My European comrades. First is all the way from Sweden. Emmanuel, how's it going?
Bork. I'm doing well. Coming to you live from what Russian trolls have deemed to be the epicenter of the corona pandemic.
What does Bork mean? Does Bork mean anything?
No. It's just something that the Muppets invented. But I don't know. It sounds kind of Netherlandsy. I always think like the Dutch actually speak like the Swedish chef. So maybe if there's someone from the Netherlands in the audience, they can tell us if Bork means anything.
The Dutch just speak like they're spitting the whole time. They're clearing the throat. It just sounds like
leave the swamp Germans alone.
That's what it sounds like. Okay, next, all the way from somewhere in London, who's moved because he is an itinerant. James, how's it going?
Yeah, formerly in Southeast London, now in Southwest London, broadcasting live from my mum's shed.
Where is South London? Whereabouts?
I'm in Kingston, down by the river. Yeah, where I grew up.
Smoking spliffs and listening to reggae music in Kingston, no doubt.
I went for a walk just now with my wife and kids down by the river, literally where I used to smoke spliffs. And I was like, that's the bench where I used to go and smoke every day. Yeah. And I could see the house I grew up in. But my dad, when he retired,
I should hope so. You're in the shed.
Well, no, he had to sell the house, and basically he was a builder, and he had a building yard where all the like bricks and sand and shit were. And because he had to retire earlier than anticipated, he had to sell the house. So I could see some other people living where I used to live. And we're now he built a house in the yard. So he got rid of all the bricks and sand and turned them into a house where he used to kind of do all his building shit. But the shed is the same shed. So at least I have that.
That's what they do now, don't they? They get bricks and sand and turn them into buildings.
Yeah, man.
That's the gist. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Especially in London. Yeah.
Especially, yeah. No wattle. No, what do they call it? Wattle walls, use wattle and mud and wattle.
Wattle and daub, I think.
Wattle and daub, that's the one, yeah. Okay, moving on next to the God knows where, Esri, the alien. How's it going?
Going good in Connecticut for a limited time. This bitch is moving.
And are you getting a new gaff down in Arizona in the mangroves?
That's right. In the humid savanna of Arizona. I'm going to be very, very comfortable in extreme heat, and it's going to be fun. I will be comfortable because they all have AC down there. And the spliff entail tobacco, James, because my custom is no tobacco. Yeah, it burns better, but I don't want to inhale that.
Yeah, it's just an English thing, It's just the way it is. But even in a bong, and even in the UK, we don't tend to put tobacco in a bong unless there's kind of an old-fashioned thing you do where you put like a wad of rolling tobacco over the hole, so the weed doesn't come through. But
that makes sense.
Yeah, in Ireland it was all resin. There was no weed at all when I was growing up.
Oh yeah, see that makes sense for tobacco.
Was that hash resin or just resin? Like,
I think he means hash. Yeah.
Yeah, hash.
Block. Yeah, hash.
Yeah. You could get pollen back then, but it was way rarer.
And you could in London, but not in Ireland. Like people would go to London and come back with stuff and go, "Hey, try this," and they'd smoke it, and it'd be like 150 times stronger than normal, and then they just fall into a coma. That's essentially what happened. So up in our next up then is. All the way from, I think it's some kind of Formula One training site, is Kyle sitting there in his special chair. How's it going, Kyle?
Yeah, not bad. I've got an update, a nailed it update. I've gone from the French to the Spanish, and I have to say, nailed it Spain is very good.
Okay.
None of the French is canceled. Can't do that. But the Spanish one is excellent. I would recommend it.
Maybe reactionary social commentary there.
Yeah, no, they're great. The Spanish show is awesome. But
like Portuguese slurs or anything like that. They don't call people.
No. Actually, it's really interesting because I think it's the only one I've seen where they like consistently have immigrants on the show and they just treat them like normal people. I was like, damn, this is unheard of. There's no ribbing. Like the French one was okay. I'm not going to go into it. I have more things to say about that, but I won't talk about it now. But yeah, things going pretty good here. Aside from all the horrible shit with COVID and the meatpacking industry, life is fine. It's getting sunny. We're not in the winter anymore. Finally. And by the way, I think that the Dutch kind of sound like Old English. If you think about it, like they actually sound really, really similar. So that's just my thought.
I don't know. I've never met a native speaker of Old English, so
no. If you listen to someone who's gone through like reconstructive Old English like training, it sounds pretty similar to Dutch. Like, yeah,
makes sense.
Top of the morning surgery. Anyway,
that's supposed to be Irish, isn't it? Top of the morning.
I don't
yeah,
know.
And no one in Ireland has ever said that. Like, literally, the only time an Irish person has ever said that is doing an impression of an American doing an impression of an Irish person.
Hey, I was doing an impression of an English person. Give me a break.
Yeah, at least get your lingo right. Okay, and finally we have Ducius Barnelius Sulla Felix. How's it going, Ducius?
I'm okay. It's been a long week. And we're beginning to be well in the summer here in Utah, because we have 4 seasons or something. And
you and Vivaldi, huh?
Yeah, me and Vivaldi. And we are opening back up here in Utah. We're at code yellow, except in Salt Lake, which is at code orange, which amuses me. Because as we learned from 9/11,
what are the differences between code yellow and code orange?
Well, code red is shelter in place. Code orange is shelter in place except for groceries. Code orange is no more than 20 people and
20.
Yeah,
20.
Code yellow is 50, and we can technically open the schools back up, although we're not. And but these codes were instigated by the governor here, and they don't match the CDC guidelines at all because we're hyper federated. Also, the CDC guidelines are crap too, but I'm okay. I think I may have had COVID in January, and I'm actually signing up to get an antibody test. So. Because I had something that was very pneumonia-like in January after flying on a plane, and it lasted for 3 to 4 weeks. So
where were you?
I was flying to the East Coast, but I flew back in through SLC, and we run straight. Like the airlines from Washington and from California run straight through here all the time.
Oh yeah.
So
good chance.
And we got evidence now that it was here in the States as early as December.
Oh, wow.
In 2 states, both California and Seattle, they found it in bodies that were coded in December. So,
but that's just the Chinese and their time machine, man. That's the time machine.
Are we going to go full? Is this going to become like the Brumaire of Alex Jones? Like,
yeah, that's where we're going. Actually, it's the 18th Brumaire of Elon Musk. Let's get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. My wife and I actually got IPTV the other week. So like now we can actually get InfoWars. Watch it live. And I've heard of InfoWars. I watch a few clips on YouTube.
Gay frogs.
Alex Jones compilations. Yeah, the gay frogs, etc. But holy shit, it's even. American television is even worse than I thought, in the worst, like in my worst nightmares, I couldn't make this shit up. I mean,
So,
It's not on
compared
television.
to
for the
American
most part.
television, you're getting it on your television. We don't watch. It doesn't come on ours. Like it's
No.
actually very hard to watch Infowars here. You have to
well, it's both the scariest and the most entertaining shit I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I interviewed a guy who does a podcast where they subject themselves to that every week to report on it, and it's called Knowledge Fight.
Oh, that'd be good.
And it's I worry for their sanity given how much they've exposed themselves to, because they've gone back and listened to his stuff because he's been doing this since the late 90s. Like,
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, I knew someone who used to live in the same town as him, and they said he was just like a local crank, like just a kind of weirdo con man sort of thing, and like nobody took him seriously at all.
So just like now.
No, actually, he's still a crank. He's still a con man, but unfortunately, people do take him seriously.
Well, I mean, some trolls on the internet, or I mean, it's America. What the hell do I know? For all I know, it's compulsory in elementary school education or something.
there are militias that take him seriously, unfortunately. So people with guns, not a
Like,
lot of them, but they're
Not a lot of them.
Pretty much like both of my parents, like to some degree, have absorbed like China virus conspiracy theories, and also they like my mom is like gone like full anti-vax, and and like so they're not watching Alex Jones, but like that.
So you guys are Canadian.
Has like a lot of outreach.
Okay, so what you don't understand, Emmanuel, is Canadians and Americans are just different in civility. We believe a lot of the same stupid bullshit. We really do. And like lived in both countries, I can attest to this. Like the difference is they're nicer than we are, but that's it. Like,
pretty much, yeah.
And
pretty
they're
much.
like to shoot you usually.
And Alex Jones used to do a show called Prison Planet. So he was popular on both the libertarian right and the libertarian left for a time, and during the anti-globalization movement.
I was about to say, like, he would like go and be somewhat supportive of stuff like Occupy. That's it, like that. That only dropped when Trump became president. But what should worry you, Emmanuel, is mainstream conservative politics in both the United States and Canada has absorbed this stuff, where conspiracy theories are common now. And
same in the UK. Same in the UK. I think it's global, man. I think it's global.
Yeah,
it's like,
I think it kind of is too.
It's like YouTube and Facebook.
Who's the anti-Soros?
Anti-Soros. Well, that's a it depends what you think Soros is. It's a complex one, that.
Well, according to Alex Jones, he's the leader of a global Marxist revolutionary movement, and I'm like, fuck, sign me up if that's true, man. If he's a crypto Marxist, I mean, damn.
Famous protege of like that famous Marxist Karl Popper, like.
Right.
You know, it's just so crank. It's fucking beyond belief. Did I tell you? I went to try and interview someone linked to like he wrote a book on Karl Popper, and this is when I started from Alpha to Omega, and it's about like 10 episodes in, and I went to interview him, and he worked for some foundations that were linked to Soros, and he got paid by Soros.
Open Society Foundation.
Yeah. But it was a specific Karl Popper one, and he was like a Karl
Open
Popper.
Society.
Oh, maybe,
Open Society and Its Enemies is a book, an anti-Hegelian tract.
Oh, I know
Karl
that,
Popper.
yeah. But I think it might be something like, maybe even something more specifically Karl Popper. But anyway,
like chair of the Open Society or something.
Yeah, but he basically started coming up with real racist shit halfway through the interview. Like he was talking like about like Obama's healthcare, how you shouldn't be able to do anything, and then he started talking about how you can't do race research anymore, and like that's and I was like, going, who the fuck is this guy? Like, it was the only interview I ever did where I ended up in a row with a guy, and I never released it because I was just like, I'm not giving this guy fucking air. But it was like the worst. yeah, like
The lost episode.
It is the lost episode. It's kind of funny because, like, like all these Soros guys, and they give money to these open democracy things and all these fucking moveon.org, and you wonder what their operatives are like, because this guy fucking was quite smooth, but you wonder if they're all like that. I don't know. It was gross.
Couldn't keep the hood in the bag.
Yeah. Okay, let's go. Let's actually do some fucking work here, boys and girls. Okay, now we have this week we are on to chapter 4. We're absolutely flying through this motherfucker. There's only 7 chapters in this. We've done 3 and 5. We're looking to mill some of these out now. This chapter I've underlined nearly every single line, so we mightn't get through it today. So same as it ever was. Gluttons for punishment. I've just tweeted Elon Musk. I think he's listening. Hi, Elon. How's it going? Okay, let's go. This one's going to do with the rise of, let's give it its full title here. What to say here? Let's get the title it gives. It says The Rise of Louis Bonaparte. Okay, who wants to go first? Who wants to give a read? Esri, how do you feel like hitting out the first couple of paragraphs here to set us off?
Let's do it. I think I know all the French in this one. Let's try this out. First 3 paragraphs. All right. In the middle of October 1849, the National Assembly met once more. On November 1st, Bonaparte surprised it with a message in which he announced the dismissal of the Barreau-Fallot ministry. Barreau-Fallot. Kyle, fact check. How am I doing? All right. Barreau-Fallot ministry and the formation of a new ministry.
Fallou.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I knew that couldn't make the same sound. That would be too nice. The Barreau-Fallot ministry and the formation of a new ministry. No one has ever sacked lackeys with less ceremony than Bonaparte, his ministers. The kicks that were intended for the National Assembly were in the meantime given to Barreau and Co. and company. The Barreau ministry, as we have seen, had been composed of legitimists and Orleanists. It was a ministry of the party of order. Bonaparte had needed it to dissolve the Republican Constituent Assembly, to bring about the expedition against Rome, and to break the Democratic Party. Behind this ministry, he had seemingly effaced himself, surrendered government power to the hands of the party of order, and donned the modest character mask that the responsible editor of a newspaper wore under Louis Philippe, the mask of the Homme de Paix. He now threw off a mask which was no longer the light veil behind which he could hide his physiognomy, but an iron mask which prevented him from downplaying a physiognomy of his own. Physiognomy of his own. He had appointed the Barreau ministry in order to blast.
Esri, that's displaying a physiognomy of his own.
Thank you. That prevented him from, what did I say? Anyway, that prevented him from displaying a physiognomy of his own. He had appointed the Barreau ministry in order to blast the Republican National Assembly in the name of the Party of Order. He dismissed it in order to declare his own name independent of the National Assembly of the Party of Order. Plausible pretexts for this dismissal were not lacking.
I don't think we need to go into this paragraph. I don't think we need to go into the paragraph. It gets a bit too just like blah, 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 blah. Okay, so unless people have anything in that paragraph they want to talk about, I think it's kind of just giving details as opposed to any kind of notes of discussion. Am I wrong? Okay.
I mean, I like the reference to the iron mask. That's kind of...
Yeah, it was really good.
Where in the next paragraph?
No, in the second one.
Yeah,
in the second paragraph, where he's like, oh yeah, like he's throwing off his light mask for the iron mask.
Physiognomy.
Mask off again. Mask off.
I sometimes really wish that the economic manuscripts had these kind of sick burns in it, because
it's so true that like not just the economic I guess what you mean, right, is, capital. By the time he gets to capital, engaging with political economy just ruins his poetic style. So Marx is in the grand tradition of Marxists, where engaging with all this scientific, at the time, literature just ruins his literary skills.
That's for sure. No, it does poke its head out in Capital now and again.
In volume 1, it does.
Yeah, but definitely in no way does you ever see it ever in volume 2, which is a goddamn graveyard. You might as well.
There's like 1 or 2 lines that are really good, and that's in a very large book.
Yeah. So getting on to this, so what's he saying? He's talking about when he got back in when the assembly met again in October, he basically got rid of his prime minister and the cabinet and all those ministers and just kicked them into the long grass. And he ordered his own ministry, and so this was like a first sign of him displaying his raw power after getting everybody to letting the Party of Order get rid of the Social Democrats and the pure Republicans. Now he was basically fighting with the Party of Order at this stage. Okay. Anything else?
Just to clarify, the Iron Mask reference is like the reference to the idea that, what was it? The king's brother was wearing the Iron Mask, and therefore this is like a reference to his like royal executive power.
Well, I took it as a reference to the man with the Iron Mask. The prisoner, who there have been numerous theories about. One of which is that specific one. But yeah, you may be right that it's even more of a sick burn with that specific theory. But yeah.
But which king's brother are we talking about here?
Was Louis the 14th? I want to say.
Louis the 14th. Yeah.
And why did
there's another theory that it was his dad.
But I think he's probably making the reference to the popular literature representation of it, which is usually that it's his brother. And he's basically, the king was keeping his brother with the Iron Mask on so he couldn't inherit the throne.
Right. I mean, yeah, because Marx liked Dumas and Steinhall a lot, so I'm pretty sure that's where it would have come from.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Like if this was written today, that'd be a gimp mask, wouldn't it? Let's be real. It'd be like his dominatrix made him put on his gimp mask.
Well, I'm not sure it works the same way.
No, but that's okay. Let's
pulling
move
rank
it on.
here. Well, and then there's the whole physiognomy thing, which, anyway, if you know the rest of Marx's oeuvre, he's thinking something weirdly racialist there.
Why? What do you think he's meaning there?
What's so physiognomy? Like,
is that a eugenics term?
It's eugenics adjacent. It's like eugenics often makes reference to physiognomy, even though physiognomy is something that way predates eugenics.
So when you read Marx, you have to remember he occasionally, there are all sorts of racial remarks in Marx, and a lot of I was reading an otherwise good edition of the Letters on the Civil War between Marx and Engels, but they try to pull all his racial references were ironic card and actually anti-racist, and it made me laugh so hard because I'm like, come on, Marx he wasn't particularly racist for the time period, but he wasn't born woke either.
Oh man, I mean, it's a better defense to say he's having heated gamer moments, essentially.
Yes, right. But yeah, I don't know if this is evidence of Marx's deep held anti-Corsican racism. We'll have to see about that. I think it's maybe more of a reference to Louis Bonaparte being quite ugly. But
Okay.
yeah.
Was Louis Bonaparte really ugly?
From what I remember, yeah, he was like not really a very good-looking person.
I mean, I
I
know
knew
you
you-
had a boner for Habsburgs, which is usually a bad sign for looking good, but
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know you were that old, Kyle, but however, you're hiding it well. Let's who's next? Who wants to go? Okay, let's go into this part here. James, how do you feel about reading? Do you want to give it a go? Because I think your internet connection may or may not be a little bit dodgy. We'll see how it sounds.
Okay, how's it sounding now?
Sounds good.
Okay, we're starting from the Barrow for Lee ministry was the first and last.
That's the one, yeah. All that paragraph.
Yeah, cool.
It's a long one.
Cool. The Barrow for Lee ministry was the first and last parliamentary ministry that Bonaparte brought into being. Its dismissal forms, accordingly, a decisive turning point. With it, the party of order lost, never to reconquer it, an indispensable position for the maintenance of the parliamentary regime, the lever of executive power. It is immediately obvious that in a country like France, where the executive power commands an army of officials numbering more than 500,000 individuals, and therefore constantly maintains an immense mass of interests and livelihoods in the most absolute dependence, where the state enmeshes, controls, regulates, superintends, and tutors civil society from its most comprehensive manifestations of life down to its most insignificant stirrings, from its most general modes of being to the private existence of individuals, where, through the most extraordinary centralization of this parasitic body, acquires an ubiquity, an omniscience, a capacity for accelerated mobility, and an elasticity which finds a counterpart only in the helpless dependence, the loose shapelessness of the actual body politic. It is obvious that in such a country, the National Assembly forfeits all real influence when it loses command of the ministerial posts, if it does not at the same time simplify the administration of the state, reduce the army of officials as far as possible, and finally, let civil society and public opinion create organs of their own independent of the government power. But it is precisely with the maintenance of that extensive state machine in its numerous ramifications that the material interests of the French bourgeois are interwoven in the closest fashion. Here it finds posts for its surplus population and makes up in the form of state salaries for what it cannot pocket in the form of profit, interest, rents, and honorariums. On the other hand, its political interest compelled it to increase daily the repressive measures and therefore the resources and the personnel of the state power, while at the same time it had to wage an uninterrupted war against public opinion and mistrustfully mutilate, cripple the independent organs of the social movement where it did not succeed in amputating them entirely. Thus, the French bourgeoisie was compelled by its class position to annihilate on the one hand the vital conditions of all parliamentary power, and therefore likewise of its own, and to render irresistible, on the other hand, the executive power hostile to it. God damn.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, I actually was thinking about this line because I have a theory about a lot of French Marxists because they come out of France, and I know that's redundant, but something about France seems to inculcate in people an absolutist view of the state, going all the way back to the Sun King, and it really seems to come out here about how like you putting all your power into the executive of the parliament, and then like you gave it too much power, it's crushing you, now let's run to this other power to contrapose it, but by doing so lose all of our representatory power because we work in an absolute state system. And as a side note, then it made sense to me that Foucault and Althusser came from this country.
Bang.
Yeah, it made me think of Althusser, and also what I've read of Poulantzas, who I think draws on this kind of Althusserian notion of the state somehow embodying and being every kind of possible facet of power. And it's really interesting that you say that kind of that lineage of the absolute through the state. And yeah, there's a hell of a lot in this this paragraph.
Yeah, it reminds me like there's an Irish kind of normal, a kind of left-friendly political guy called Vincent Brown. He used to have a show on, and he'd be always talking to like the new MPs that would come in into the Dáil in Ireland, the TDs that would come into the Parliament, and he would say to them, they might be an independent TD from, I don't know, somewhere off in Connacht or something, not in a party, and they'd say, well, what's the point in you being in Parliament at all? He'd say, you know that the ministries just do everything. They come in, they let you have a chat about what they're going to push through, and like it's totally pointless. He said, your role is completely pointless. It's just money for you in your back pocket or something. And like, I remember thinking, like, God, it's a bit crude, but like, honestly, it's probably true. Like, and we see it here, that it's like, it's probably why politicians, they really fight over ministerial positions, because unless they have an executive position, they're essentially, they might as well be on a podcast like us. I think Marx is really saying something critical here about the organization of the state in bourgeois politics, that I think is pretty deep.
What is interesting, because it doesn't apply to America. Actually,
yes,
I
was thinking
this system, and I know that there's a lot.
Why not?
Because our executive has our legislature has actual real counterpower to the executive in a way that it's not possible when the executive and legislative are combined.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
But then also we have the commander-in-chief thing, and so there's tons of executive power technically centralized under the president.
It's more. It seems more like the old Roman model than it does like parliamentary model, like at all, like really. And I think that leads people to misunderstand. But
I have a question. I have a question for you, Derek. Sorry to interrupt here. Like, but like in like say in the UK and in other parliamentary systems, the backbenchers can get through legislation, but it's just very difficult for them. Is it not the same in like the Senate or the House of Representatives, that the senators can get it through, but unless the executive are supporting it, the power of the executive is that they generally don't get through?
They can force it through.
But like, I mean, in practice, do they really ever get stuff through much? That's countered.
The backbenchers,
historically, they did until it was more common during the 70s. It's also the same reason we don't have as many constitutional amendments anymore. Part of that has to do with partisan sorting in the United States, which used to be a lot less rigid.
Yeah, translate backbenchers for American listeners.
Like a backbencher is probably like somebody who's not on a committee in the Senate or in the House of Representatives, just like a bog standard elected person. The Senate in America seems to be stronger. They're kind of all a little bit stronger than backbenchers.
So in the UK, you have the front bench of the government and then the shadow front bench of the opposition party, and there'll all be people that will either be ministers or shadow ministers, and then there'll be secretaries below them and vice secretaries, and then there's usually a rump of people who don't have any role on any of those kind of committees. So McDonnell and Corbyn are good examples. They were backbenchers for pretty much their entire careers, which gave them some license to kind of vote in ways that could be perceived to be, voting their conscience, because they were very rarely involved in any kind of ministerial or secretarial post. So there's like a long tradition within English Parliament of backbenchers kind of being able to be within the parliamentary system, quote unquote rebel figures. So yeah, I don't know how that translates though to within like the Senate or Congress.
Because our congressional committees are super important, but they have no relationship to the cabinet, to our cabinet ministries at all.
Right.
So those are more formally separated than they are in parliamentary systems, and it leads I think our Congress has not deigned to use it, but they actually do have power to rein in the executive unless the executive really wants to start forcing the army in ways that are unconstitutional. It's not based on our mode of government. You could kind of see as early bourgeois.
Yes.
It's not, and so it's different. It's more based off of Roman Republican models as adopted by the bourgeois, as opposed to parliamentary stuff, which is, in my mind, more purely bourgeois.
But I guess the overall point being expressed here is that the bourgeoisie finds it necessary to undermine the preconditions for its own role. And I think that that's an interesting sort of Marxian theory that, you know, democracy basically incompatible with capitalism. And, you know, I think a lot of us feel differently about that these days, but all the same, I think that abstracted bit makes more sense than the nuts and bolts of how you get there in the American context.
I also just wanted to call attention to the line, here the bourgeoisie finds posts for its surplus population and makes up in the form of state salaries for what it cannot pocket in the form of profit, interest, rents, and honorariums. So that, I think, definitely applies to the U.S., even if the other elements don't. Like, because, you know, the amount of like just grift, like horse trading and stuff that happens in Congress, and all of the corruption and kickbacks and all that kind of stuff, it's you know, very real. Yeah.
So one thing confuses me about why this doesn't apply to the U.S., because I read this as Marx talking about the executive power has power over state officials and civil state officials, right? Can't the president fire, you know, half of the CDC or whatever? I mean, didn't Trump fire like shit ton of science whatevers and the pandemic commission and whatnot?
Yes.
So I'm not exactly. I'm not still not exactly up to speed about why this doesn't apply to.
Our federal ministries are not that powerful, though. Like our states do what the hell they want, and like what all the CDC and these pandemic stuff and a lot of these executive cabinet functions, all they can do is advise.
Right.
So
that would be the main difference.
So, I mean, like, we're a hyper-federated system. And I think that's another thing that, like, makes us different than Europe, because our federal executive is super strong on foreign policy and actually in ways that you're not in Europe. But it's not like Trump firing the CDC matters for like a lot of things, but at the end of the day, like the CDC guidelines aren't even enforceable upon the states. There's no, like, they can't constitutionally can't really do it.
Okay, I was going to say, like, so let's think about how this would apply to, say, our own kind of wannabe revolution in 50 years' time or whatever the hell something might happen. Like, what does this say to us about the importance of executive power, and how should we approach it as commies?
Well, I mean, I was gonna just sort of echo the consultory role of like subcommittees and shit in the U.S., but in terms of executive power, frankly, I think it has most import to us, you know, as pro-revolutionaries, in the sense of the shape that the counter-revolution will take, and the kind of actually effective leadership that will be available on the part of the bourgeoisie, in terms of having centralized sort of command over certain parts of the executive, the gendarme, not really the parts being discussed here, not the consultative ish.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think, since he's not talking about executive power as such, or even the division between the executive and the legislative as such, but this specific division between them, and also like the stupidity of particular parties and whatnot. I find it hard to draw any like real conclusions from it, other than, you know, watch your step and don't if you train people to fight for you, you know, don't act surprised if they start fighting with the same methods but for their own interests later on. But like that's so broad a lesson that I don't know if it diminishes the the very detailed critique he makes in this case. But yeah, I don't know. Come to Sweden, we have very good executive division of powers and responsibility in official and political life.
Yeah, I was thinking that it does kind of put a damper on the idea that we could easily run a presidential campaign and lead to a revolution, though, as some people seem to have thought we could do.
That it does, yeah.
I think it says something more fundamental about the nature of power and executive functions, to be honest with you. Like, if we go back to the McNair reading group series, in that, like, McNair was talking about why the Soviets weren't a particularly useful tool for getting stuff done after the revolution, that they weren't in continuous session, stuff like that. Like, that there are certain things about executive power that, like, if you had a revolution, initially you're probably going to have executive functions of power. It's not going to be immediately decentralized. If we think about, like, what the dictatorship of the proletariat would involve, it would involve some kind of body making executive functions about how we reorganize society. So it says something to me specific about organizational function and the differences between them. Like, it's one thing us wanting decentralized plant, Stafford beer, whatever, Marx's critique the Gothic program, labor time, token planning society, right? And it's another whole other thing doing that 10-year step to actually implementing that goddamn total reorganization of society, that on some stage there's going to be executive function, more than likely, in that time period. So, like, I think it's saying, something more than just look over your shoulder.
I think you have to read this though in the context of like Marx's commentary on Lassalle, and particularly when you realize that Lassalle was a crypto monarchist and thought that you could use the aristocratic hostility towards democracy as a way to battle bourgeois democratic tendencies, and Marx thought that was dangerous in the extreme. So, like, there's, if you take the difference between Marxism and Lassalleanism seriously, it really does mean that there's a fundamental caution about over-investing in the executive without that executive itself being somehow fairly democratized.
Yeah, the classical Marxian answer that he derives in the 1870s from the Paris Commune is essentially the abolition between the separation of powers between the executive and legislative bodies. In the American tradition, that sounds like tyranny, but like with regards to the Paris Commune, if you had something like an extremely representative democracy like the Paris Commune, or if you had some cybernetic form of direct democracy, a principle like that could be, something emancipatory in a revolutionary Dick Prohl situation.
There does seem to be something in the paragraph here, though, that kind of made me think that it is kind of instructive in terms of a longer-term kind of strategic position vis-a-vis how to deal with the executive. And it does seem like a call for, there's the quote here about how you simplify the administration of the state, reduce the army of officials as far as possible, and finally let civil society and public opinion create organs of their own independent of governmental power. So that does seem kind of like a call for base building or building of parallel institutions within the society that can contend against power. I don't know what people think of that.
Yeah, like, he seems to be saying that, like, well, if I, obviously he's saying if I was the goddamn party of order, I would never let him get rid of our ministries unless we totally dismantled every part of his power base in the state. So, like, if we're thinking of getting rid of essentially, the bourgeois state. Like I do think that's a well-made point.
Well, if you think about the Muslim Brotherhood, who had a dual power model of organization, and they still didn't do that because they knew they didn't have the capacity to run the ministries, and they left it up to the military. Well, they're illegal and mostly in a prison I used to live across the street from now. So, like I've seen this firsthand. If you don't take out the apparatus of government, and for all the weirdo right wing complaining about the deep state, they actually do kind of have a little bit of a point.
Yeah. In the U.S., like revolutionary language and even the whole mode of thought of overthrow the Constitution or something to save it, of course, like it's all coded as right wing.
Yeah, we've kind of been talking about this in the beer reading group that we're doing over on General Intellect Unit. I don't want to get too deep into it because it's a subject that, like, we're still working through the sort of groundwork of what Beer's saying about organization and executive power, autonomy, centralization, decentralization, all that kind of stuff. But I think what I'm starting to see in Beer is that you can't, like, he's not really in favor of a purely unitary executive legislative body for the reason that you need to have antagonisms in your organization that are going to mutually correct each other. But again, I feel like it's branching off into another discussion. I would say it's not as simple as saying get rid of the executive, we're going to have direct democracy. That's not really what Beer's agenda was. It's something a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, that was just a possible Beerian interpretation of a questionable Marxian tenet.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like we need to do like a separate discussion about that, but it's definitely a conversation I want to have.
Yeah, it's because of what Derek was getting at with the sort of lineage of the absolutist state, the sort of like French political context stamping something really kind of simple onto Marx's political thought that the bourgeoisie destroys democracy to keep its own rule intact. That hasn't always been my experience. Sometimes they can get away with hegemony or something, but like it's kind of a very simple way of thinking about politics.
So what this leads me to think a little bit about, though, is and before we move on, because this is kind of huge, that this would have led to some of the tensions in the First International that caused the anarchists to go get weird, because it does seem like it's hard to reconcile some of what this implies about the executive and like both destroying and taking over the functions of the state while forming a parallel institution, while also still maintaining some democratic relationship to the existing state. While it's really hard to map out what Marx is actually substantively advocating for here. And as I've talked to with Douglas Lane a few times, it's hard to figure out when it's instrumental and when it's fundamental. It's really not clear. I mean, and this, so I now get how you could have people read this and get everything from Bernstein to Bordiga. Like it's really broad on what this would actually mean. And so, I guess my question is, there's a hostility towards the state in this text that's different than some of the other texts. He calls eventually for like the abolition of taxes in here, so it's even hard to square with some of the demands of the manifesto. And I just want if you think this has anything to do with that. I know we're all hitting a bunch of, because we're all like, this is coming up in a lot of our podcasts in different ways, and so like it's like a crucial thing that's also in like an otherwise seemingly boring part of the book, but still.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's a kind of a question I have for those that have read kind of beyond the major text, because I've only really read the kind of major Marxist text, and this seems like one of the instances where he is making kind of descriptive or kind of an analysis of the state. I was wondering, beyond kind of the major text, does he elaborate? I know that there was the plan to write the books beyond Capital where he would elaborate the state, but in Letters and Further Writings, does he go beyond what's in the Brumaire in terms of his conception of the state and how it should be dealt with, essentially? Because from what I've read, what's in the Brumaire is a lot of the work that he did do on the state. So I was just wondering, what you guys if there was anything further than what's actually here that could help nuance the kind of questions that Derek is raising there. Because it doesn't, I completely agree that it seems like it's not entirely clear what he's exactly advocating for here.
The two texts that I think it comes up again, and they're both about France, is the Civil War in France and on the nationalization of the land. Like, and then all the battles with the Lasallians. But then trying to parse that with his battles with the Bakuninists makes it really strange and leads to, like, those tensions lead to weird stuff like George Soros. So,
George Soros is, he's there so long. Like, he's got to be a lizard. He's definitely got to be a
George Sorel, like the myth and violence guy. Like,
I know that, Derek. I know that. I was making a joke. I am capable of joking. Now,
I am not. I am not Irish.
That's true. I kind of think that when we put up our next reading group series, I think the Civil War in France might be the next one. What do people think? Unless we get Esri's.
I just want to binge Marx, because I mean that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it is a podcast.
I really do think there's value in doing the Eric Olin right now, because the divisions within the working class are so stark at this moment.
Yeah.
Like in the COVID pandemic, they've become so clear. Yes. And it's a matter of life and death. And that, I think, would be really good to look into. As much as the Civil War in France is a good text, I really do think the Eric Olin right would be good to look into.
You're selling me. The Understanding Class one, the recent one, or the first book of class?
Yeah. You're selling me. You're selling me anyway. Let's keep going. Will we keep going? Everybody talked out there. Okay, we're going up the list of people here. So Esri spoke, James spoke. Next, it's up to Emmanuel, who is getting prepared. He's getting his deep Swedish tones ready. Let's hit these couple of paragraphs here. Can you see them, Emmanuel?
Okay, protocol droid mode.
Emmanuel, I have a question for you, Emmanuel. Do you drink whiskey and do you smoke cigars?
I do drink whiskey. I do not smoke cigars. It's been a long time.
Yeah, you can hear it in your voice. Your voice is, when you actually read, it drops about an octave. It's really
yeah. That's actually kind of funny. It really does. Okay. Okay. So, intellectual protocol droid mode. The new ministry was called the Opul Ministry, not in the sense that General Opul had received the rank of Prime Minister. Rather, simultaneously with Barrot's dismissal, Bonaparte abolished this dignity, which, true enough, condemned the President of the Republic to the status of legal nonentity of a constitutional monarch. But of a constitutional monarch without throne or crown, without scepter or sword, without freedom from responsibility, without imprescriptible possession of the highest state dignity, and, worst of all, without a civil list. The Opul ministry contained only one man in parliamentary standing, the moneylender Fould, one of the most notorious of the high financiers. To his lot fell the Ministry of Finance. Look up the quotations on the Paris Bulls, and you will find that from November 1st, 1849, onward the French funds, government securities, rise and fall with the rise and fall of Bonapartist stocks. While Bonaparte had thus found his ally in the Bulls, he at the same time took possession of the police by appointing Carlier police prefect of Paris. Only in the course of development, however, could the consequences of the change of ministers come to light. To begin with, Bonaparte had taken a step forward, only to be driven backward all the more conspicuously. His brusque message was followed by the most servile declaration of allegiance to the National Assembly. As often as the ministers dared to make a diffident attempt to introduce his personal fads as legislative proposals, they themselves seemed to carry out, against their will and compelled by their position, comical commissions, whose fruitlessness they were persuaded of in advance. As often as Bonaparte blurted out his intentions behind the ministers' backs and played with his idée Napoléonienne, his own ministers disavowed him of the tribune of the National Assembly. His usurpatory longings seemed to make themselves heard only in order that the malicious laughter of his opponents might not be muted. He behaved like an unrecognized genius, whom all the world takes for a simpleton. Never did he enjoy the contempt of all classes in fuller measure than during this period. Never did the bourgeoisie rule more absolutely. Never did it display more ostentatiously the insignia of domination.
Okay, Jesus
Manuel,
Christ. It was like
if
listening
we ever,
End protocol droid program, Cambridge professor.
if we ever record audiobooks, I'm just saying, like, you're the guy.
Yeah, call me audible voice.
It's like listening to a goddamn 1970s BBC Two documentary about, like, I don't know, wool making. They'd have, like,
if it was 1970s BBC, it would be like, only in the course of development, however, could the consequences of the change of ministers come to light.
They'd have a slightly more working class, but they'd either be extremely plummy or slightly working class. You know, when maybe a northern miner or something. Okay, so what he's getting at here is that let's parse that. So Napoleon essentially was making himself look like, pretending to make himself look like a fool, but really making the actual parliament look like fools by put forward in like really daft proposals and making them debate it out and letting the stink go on them and letting everybody think, God, these goddamn parliamentarians are a load of rubbish. He's a sneaky bastard, essentially. This is what we're saying.
All right, that part reminds me of Trump.
I was about to say, it reminds me of of all the Republican presidents of the United States since 1980. Like, because except for the one that failed, George Herbert, except for Bush Sr. I mean, because they all do this. They all would play like, they would all play the fool. Like, I used to think, like, you know, how is W fooling people with his like down home stick when he comes from Connecticut? Sorry, Esri.
Oh, no offense taken.
And I mean, I know he's mostly raised in Texas, but like this is a Prince Hal act, right? And I was actually also thinking that, like, this is a tactic that goes back way before bourgeois rule. Like Shakespeare brings it up. Like, pretend to be dumb, have Parliament do stupid shit while you're pretending to be dumb, and then discredit them. Like, and also win over people to your side because they think, oh, he's this person's simple like us, and look at these egg-headed nincompoops over here debating this dumb shit. And like, it's an effective strategy. Do other countries has this happened as clearly as in the United States? Like I mean, Boris Johnson seems clearly to be doing this, but
yeah, I was going to say he's the obvious parallel. I mean, I'm always like nervous of the Trump Johnson comparisons, but in terms of like this line, he behaved like an unrecognized genius whom the world takes for a simpleton. Good.
But there are people, yeah, like, but in England there are people, because he's posh, they think he's a genius. They think he's a genius, but somehow is a fool. And other people think he's a fool.
Yeah, it works both ways for him.
But like, Sir Berlusconi did exactly the same trick. He would go to the European Parliament, and he would say to like some of the Germans in there, he's like, "Oh yes, mine Hitler," and he would like basically just do like jokes from like a Carry On film, like Carry On Germany or Carry On War or something. Like it was comical. Like
it's pure bunga time.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a perfect description of trolling. Like how because in the Swedish translation it comes less across like he's pretending to be the fool, and more like Marx actually does consider him a genuine dumbass, and like a real clown who nonetheless manages to win precisely because his own ministers laugh at him behind his back, and the Napoleonic dreams or Napoleonic ideas, like his grand vision of becoming the new Napoleon or whatever. He sounds a lot more like heckling of Louis Bonaparte in the Swedish translation. It's not literal, but like between the lines, as it were. Like the tone is more like judgy in a way, or like diminishing of him. But I think the point of like the result of all of this is that his opponents just become more and more like they make fun of him more and more, which and he becomes less and less popular with the popular vote, etc. But that itself kind of made him stronger. Like when I read this, like it was, I just thought of Trump immediately. Like there was no no way that my mind wasn't immediately gonna wander in that direction. Also, I'm kind of surprised that so this is a minor thing, but like the Bourse in Paris. So in Swedish, that's Bush, like, which is obviously borrowed from that, but that just means stock exchange. So I'm kind of surprised that they didn't like put that in the translation, that he's referring to the stock exchange.
In your Bork translation. Your Bork translation doesn't sound as direct as this one that was probably supervised by Engels or some shit. No. Oh, okay. No.
I have a joke about bunga bunga if anybody wants to hear it.
Oh Christ.
It's a bit long. Ask me off screen and I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Patreon bonus. All right.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I was next to the stack, so I'll speak here. I think so. One example I can think of in Canada of somebody who did this kind of routine and was quite a master of it was Ralph Klein, who is a premier of Alberta. Enormously popular, and very clownish. People still sort of tell stories about like being at the bars and seeing him just drunk off of his ass, just absolutely shambolic in his behavior. I think he once like was just down on the street downtown, and he like assaulted a homeless person when he was drunk, and like it's just really, really just crude behavior. But everybody, like, I used to go canvass for the Social Democratic Party, and you talk to people and they say like, oh, I loved Ralph, like he was the guy. Like I could sympathize with Ralph. Like maybe I'll vote Social Democratic, but if Ralph came back, back from the like his obscurity, then I'd be on Team Ralph all over again. And he did a lot of sort of like Bonapartist kind of things too, like just like giving money out of the oil revenues to people to like buy them off. But the interesting thing there is that like we kind of like have a system where the leader of the dominant party in parliament will have pretty much all the power. So he wasn't using this to play off against Parliament so much as he was to just kind of monopolize the media and create this incredible public performance. But you know, he was a real master of that. And yeah, aside from that, I just wanted to touch on that thing about the idée Napoléon. So this was a thing that Bonaparte had been doing for a long time. He sort of like wrote op-ed pieces, more or less, or like kind of like idea pieces that he would get published, which were vaguely sort of like Saint-Simonian, but with a really strong executive focus on like basically monarchy. And this current of thought that he initiated was really influential after he got in power, in like rebuilding Paris and so on. And actually continued to really be a current in French politics, like down to the present. This idea of like a super powerful bourgeois executive that does a lot of state action and state intervention in the economy. So it was kind of a joke because he was just sort of like this crank on the outside writing these op-ed pieces, but it did actually end up having an effect in the long term.
Damn.
Okay. Anybody else? Are we good to go on to the next?
Yeah, we could talk about this all day because it's, you know, the last 50 years of, you know, mostly right-wing populist politics.
Yeah, I was going to say I could come in and kind of compare experiences I had canvassing in the 2019 general election with some of Carl's experiences with Johnson, but I think there's some paragraphs coming up that highlight it even more clearly, kind of what I was getting on the doorstep. So yeah, cool to move on.
Okay, let's go. Who's next up the stack? We go all the way to the Duke himself. Let's see, how far will we go, Duke? This is like Dukes of Hazzard. It's pretty cool. Okay, let's try that much there, will we? Okay, can you see that, Derek?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Remember, a finite speed.
I have not here to write the history of its legislative activity, which is summarized during the period in two laws: in the law of reestablishing the wine tax and the education law abolishing unbelief. If wine drinking was made harder for the French, they were presented all the more plentiful with the water of true life. If in the law on the wine tax the bourgeoisie declared the old hateful French tax system to be involatile, it sought through the education law to ensure among the masses the old state of mind that put
Derek, that's inviolable. A hateful French tax system to be inviolable. Yeah, can you read from there again, please? Sorry. Yeah.
No problem. It sought through the education law to ensure amongst the masses the old state of mind that put up with the tax system. One is astonished to see the Orleanists, the liberal bourgeois, these old apostles of voluntarism and eclectic philosophy, entrust to their hereditary enemies, the Jesuits, the superintendents of the French mind. However, in regards to the pretenders to the throne, Orleanists and Legitimists could part company. They understood that to secure their united rule necessitated the uniting of the means of repression of two epochs, that the means of subjugation of the July monarchy had to be supplemented and strengthened by the means of subjugation of the Restoration. The peasants, disappointed in all their hopes, crushed more than ever by the low level of grain prices on one hand and by the growing burden of taxes and mortgage debts on the other, began to bestir themselves into the departments. They were answered by a drive against the schoolmasters, who were made subject to the clergy, by a drive against the marms, the mayors, who were made subject to the prefects, and by the system of espionage to which all were made subject. In Paris and the large towns, reaction itself has the physiognomy of its epochs and challenges more than it strikes down. In the countryside, it becomes dull, coarse, petty, tiresome, and vexations, in a word, the gendarme. One comprehends in 3 years of the regime of the gendarme, consecrated by the regime of the priest, were bound to demoralize the immature masses. Whatever amount of passion and declamation might be employed by the party of order against the minority from the tribute of the National Assembly, its speeches remained as monosyllabic as that of the Christians, whose words were to be yea, yea, nay, nay, as monosyllabic on the platform as in the press. Flat as a riddle whose answer is known in advance, whether it was a question of the right of petition, or the tax on wine, freedom of the press, or free trade, the clubs are the municipal charter, protection of personal liberties, or regulation of the state budget. The watchword constantly recurs. The theme remains always the same. The verdict is ever ready and invariably reads socialism. Even bourgeois liberalism is declared socialistic. Bourgeois enlightenment, socialistic. Bourgeois financial reform, socialistic. It was socialistic to build a railway where a canal already existed, and it was socialistic to defend oneself with a cane when one was attacked with a rapier. Holy shit. Does that feel real?
That feels extraordinarily real. It's like the last two, like the Bernie and Corbyn. Like this reads like the last general election in the UK, where one of the interviewers in a BBC debate, this is not a joke, she asked one of the, I think it was Angela Raymer, and she asked her, "Do you want to nationalize sausages?" That was an actual political question in one of the big debates.
Yeah, by one of the BBC's
Sweden had nationalized sausages until the 1970s.
Yeah.
Or rather, hot dog stands were nationalized, or communalized rather. Yeah. So there was So we have communes, which are like municipalities, but a lot more autonomous, basically. And they were a lot more autonomous back in the day partly because of Marx. Marx and Engels were, all about very local government, and that like the local community should run everything. And so that kind of partially grew out of that idea. So the communes or the municipalities had the monopoly on hot dog stands, and all the dishes you could offer were pre-approved by government.
Were they all called stuff like the people's Wurst and stuff like that?
Actually, yes, but not in that way. Like, but like if you would do a literal translation, some of them, yeah. Fun fact: this meant that the hamburger was actually banned in Sweden. You could not legally serve a hamburger because it was not on the pre-approved list of the people's hot dogs until one municipal hot dog stand had the amazing idea of claiming before court that it was not in fact a hamburger; it was merely a flattened meatball between two flatter hot dog buns. And meatballs were approved, and hot dogs were approved, and so the story goes, he actually won that case, and from then on, the people's hamburger was invented, and up until the early 1990s, we had a state-owned hamburger chain, which was meant to compete with McDonald's. I actually remember the state-run hamburger joints, composed by the greatest minds and chefs and
Wow.
scientists that the government could muster.
Well, how did it compare to a Big Mac?
Similar.
Better? Worse?
Oh God!
Is
I
20th
would say
century
pretty much about the same. I was like 7 or 8. So
Seriously, it feels like I dozed off, and I'm basically in the middle of a dream, and the dream has mashed into the state-run hot dog stands, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's good. I better fucking ask a question now. What's going on?
So
And they ban hamburgers? Like that is cause for insurrection in the United States.
So to get back on topic a little bit, I was thinking, one of the commenters mentioned the change of the word socialistic, but I was also thinking about how this indicated, one of the things that seems to me about this is that in a lot of Europe and definitely in the States and Canada, a lot of socialists started to believe this shit too. Like they just started internalizing the critique and just adopting it as their platform over time. And did that happen in France too? I don't know. This is a real question.
Yeah, Louis Blanc and government socialism.
Yeah, but that was before this. So
it was but it was already there. And I don't know. That's the socialist. That's what most people mean by socialism. And I know that shouldn't matter, but that's just it.
But the word has changed what it means so much. I mean, I know that's why Marx is weird about when he uses it, when he distinguishes it from communism, when he doesn't. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know part of when you read about why they called themselves the Communist League, it was because they they sided with the British over the French on who they were identifying with. And the charterists were also called communists. So the charterists were aligned with a group called the Communists in Britain, which we forget. But it does seem to me like this, if you do this enough, one of the weird counter effects is you start believing the critique, the other side does too.
I do have to step in to briefly ask the question: does socialism equal committees plus flattened meatballs? Was Lenin wrong?
The electrification of the spatula, I think, is what communism is.
2/3 right, 1/3 wrong.
Yeah. So can we talk a little bit going back to the text a little bit here, talking about just the kind of politics that went on as opposed to the socialism stuff that everything is thrown at today. So that the parliament under the the rule of the Party of Order, they brought back in all the most kind of the worst elements of would we say society before even the first French Revolution? Wine taxes. They brought the Jesuits back into power. They put the church teachings back into the schools. They made it illegal to teach unbelief, or did they make unbelief illegal?
They made unbelief illegal.
They essentially handed education over to the Jesuits, the way Marx puts it.
They seem to think if they tax the wine and get the Jesuits back, people will then be more pliant in terms of paying their taxes.
Yeah. So the peasants were getting shafted from every which way. And you wonder the tactic of Bonaparte was to basically just put forward frivolous shit all the time that would basically get sent down, and he was counterposed with respect to all these hard-ass anti-republican reforms that were done basically by the Party of Order. So he juxtaposed himself even more against them. That's essentially what Marx is saying in this paragraph. Kyle, you're nodding.
Yeah, no, it checks out. That sounds right.
So, like, seriously, God damn it! This text is a pain in the ass, because literally it just applies to every, like, the politics hasn't changed. Like, you know, like, it's just basically like reading a good article about like the last general election in whichever country we're in.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of depressing that structurally the politics, like, well, I don't know, structurally we're in the same place fundamentally, but like the politics of the left hasn't evolved beyond 1848. Is that what we're like?
Well, if it's depressing as a human living through it, maybe we can take refuge in an alienated form as intellectuals analyzing it, that we have something a little more stable by which to analyze, because we have something that appears regularly throughout political life, you know, from this point forward, at the very least, if we're to believe Marx, and we kind of do.
So,
But it's more like we've regressed all the way back to 1848. That's the point.
Yep.
Well, Marx is talking about regression from this, like, in 1860. Like, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
1850, but yeah.
I know, when I was reading the reflections in 1860, he was talking about in the International, like he had to couch his language more because we had already regressed from the points where he was writing this.
Excuse me.
Like, so, like, and this is you know, talking about regression, but like 4 or 5 years after the fact. So, like, you have immediate regression, like if you look at if you don't look at the economic situation, but you look at political situation, it does like lead you to like maybe the degeneration theory may be correct or something. Like, it's
what's that theory? What's that?
That capitalist political forms are actually degenerative because like they're overripe, and they've been overripe since they pretty much existed.
Right. Yeah. The idea is essentially that the reason that Marx's politics don't seem to work in, you know, after like a certain period is because in most cases, it's usually the idea that the productive forces have developed to so much technology that it overgrew just the period where you could consign feeding the entire, you know, area to 5% of the population and have other people do other shit, which is sort of the groundwork for socialism. At least that was Bordiga's read of it. I think it's a good one. And then it like over-ripened to the point where it developed like security states and nukes and just like, nope, none of this is going to help us. This is all just going to keep the situation in place. Fuck, we missed our window here. We're not going to be able to use Marx's political strategy anymore. It's basically one of the things in left communist theory that allows you to be like an orthodox Marxist and basically just throw out everything Marx said about political strategy.
Yeah, everything. But the other thing about it that I think is interesting is it can lead you to someplace else. It can lead you to Hotel Grand Abyss.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's, I think, what is suggested to most people when they hear it. Not like, oh, good, now we have to pursue new strategies. It's you know, Edward Munch's The Scream.
I mean, you just think like Adorno and Horkheimer forever, or like Orwell's, you know, ranting at the end of 1984. I mean, it's
right.
It's a super bummer.
Yeah. So someone in the chat said that the secret, when we were saying Marx was racist, said, "Oh, why is the Secret Service here?" But this is the real Secret Service, you know, question in Marxism. Like, are we sure this just isn't like function to actually paralyze people in doubt and fear? Like,
yeah, like, I don't know. It seems to me that, like, just on a very small scale, if you look at the question that kind of people that were all in for Bernie are saying, they're actually kind of going to, they've realized something about the political game. So, like, I don't see it as an end game. I don't think that this. I think that there is definite movement. Like, I think we're all Marxists. Do we all think that capitalism is the last social form ever? It's the end of history? Do we actually believe that? If we don't believe that, then we can't believe that other theory.
No, but what we don't believe is that, and this is something we've kind of worked out, or at least maybe a bunch of us don't believe that the orthodox Marxist, quote unquote, electoral strategy works. It's rather that there's like a Marxian politics that wasn't as sanguine on using the existing executive, that is a living tradition.
Sorry.
Other than the Leninist one?
Yeah, I said living. The only place Leninism lives is, under with to get rich is glorious,
Lenin lives. Okay.
Lenin laughs, Lenin loves.
Right. Now we're all the way up to Mr. Bombastic, semi-fantastic himself, Kyle. Do you want to hit the next?
Wow.
Do you like that intro? Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's pretty amazing. Okay. So this was not merely a figure of speech.
Yeah, all the way.
All right.
All the way. Wait.
I think that more accurately describes James based on his childhood antics.
Yeah.
13 years antics, I assume.
All right. So this was not merely a figure of speech, fashion, or party tactics. The bourgeoisie had a true insight into the fact that all the weapons it had forged against feudalism turned their points against itself, that all the means of education it had produced rebelled against its own civilization, that all the gods it had created had fallen away from it. It understood that all the so-called bourgeois liberties and organs of progress attacked and menaced its class rule at its social foundation and its political summit simultaneously, and had therefore become, quote-unquote, socialistic. In this menace and this attack, it rightly discerned the secret of socialism, whose import and tendency it judges more correctly than so-called socialism knows how to judge itself. The latter can, accordingly, not comprehend why the bourgeoisie callously hardens its heart against it, whether it sentimentally bewails the sufferings of mankind, or in Christian spirit prophesies the millennium and universal brotherly love, or in humanistic style twaddles about mind, education, and freedom, or in doctrinaire fashion invents a system for the conciliation and welfare of all classes. What the bourgeoisie did not grasp, however, was the logical conclusion that its own parliamentary regime, its political rule in general, was now also bound to meet with the general verdict of condemnation as being socialistic. As long as the rule of the bourgeois class had not been completely organized, as long as it had not acquired its pure political expression, the antagonism of the other classes likewise could not appear in its pure form, and where it did appear could not take the dangerous turn that transforms every struggle against the state power into a struggle against capital. If in every stirring of life in society it saw tranquility imperiled, how could it want to maintain at the head of society a regime of unrest, its own regime, the parliamentary regime, this regime that, according to the expression of one of its spokesmen, lives in struggle and by struggle? The parliamentary regime lives by discussion. How shall it forbid discussion? Every interest, every social institution is here transformed into general ideas, debated as ideas. How shall any interest, any institution sustain itself above thought and impose itself as an article of faith? The struggle of the orators on the platform evokes the struggle of the scribblers of the press. The debating club in Parliament is necessarily supplemented by debating clubs in the salons and the bistros. The representatives who constantly appeal to public opinion give public opinion the right to speak its real mind in petitions. The parliamentary regime leaves everything to the decision of majorities. How shall the great majorities outside Parliament not want to decide? When you play the fiddle at the top of the state, what else is to be expected but that those down below dance?
Okay, who's up? Who's up?
Okay.
You know what is amazing about this to me is that the whole degeneration in America of, conflating socialism and liberal can actually sort of be explained in this paragraph.
Yes.
like wow, like you've gone so far with your denouncing all public institutions to maintain your own class power, to the point that the difference between liberalism and socialism really is obscured.
Well, if you're to carry like sorry.
Go ahead. Even in places like Sweden, where we have committees to flatten meatballs. I mean,
well, if you're to carry the humanist torch, this was just more accurately perceived in places like Sweden, where they named their, bourgeois state apparatus after Marx stuff because they were trying to be kind of socialist. Like instead of like, in a way, in America, like it's kind of refreshing that we all coded all of our Keynesian class compromise as being anti-Marxist because, in a way, like it provides like a better read of history. But if you really took the Enlightenment very seriously, if you really took humanism very seriously, if you cared more about humanism than the Enlightenment, even, like if you really like expanded and extrapolate it based on everything we know about human beings, it's hard not to be a socialist. Like if you really take those principles seriously, if you look at humanism and go social Darwinism, maybe, like I think that's a path out of humanism. And yeah, if you're really faithful to the principles of humanism, you do get to socialism. And therefore that's a big problem for a thinker, right? Like it's a problem that Einstein became a socialist.
Well, it's interesting to me because you now kind of see that thing that people throw off, that when Marx wrote to Lincoln, when he said that, the liberal revolutions can't finish themselves, and this is why. Like, this is where he explicitly states why, instead of just saying it in a vague way.
Yeah, and already the members of the Party of Order, when they were writing their intellectual treaties, were deploying the arguments of social Darwinism without the Darwinism. They were making appeals to God and stuff like that instead of Darwin. But the core of the argument was already being expressed in bourgeois political economy quite commonly.
Right. So you flipped God and Darwin. Yeah, so it's funny that you see both the virtuous sort of like humanist process of becoming a socialist and like the ugly process of the conflation of anything the state does with socialism that we end up with.
But fire engines are socialist, aren't they? There's fire engines. We also have fire hoses. I think fire hoses are also socialists.
Oh, those are full communists. It's combined in uneven development.
Oh, okay, they're communist. Okay, yeah. Fire hydrants now. I'm not sure where do fire hydrants sit on this spectrum.
They're social fascist, but they'll come around.
They'll come around. Okay. No, it's really brilliant stuff here. One bit is interesting. He says about how because the capitalist faction, like the Party of Order, is split between the Orleanists and the Legitimists, that because that they weren't kind of united, obviously in a pure capital, in a political form as capital, that the socialists couldn't basically realize their true enemy in capital. That's an interesting insight that's probably more historical now than it gives us any insight. What do people think?
I think from my experience with sort of capitalist one-party states, that this is like, it doesn't really point to any kind of political trajectory. because the one party state will always subdivide itself into factions. And that becomes the substance of politics. So you're never really going to have, unless you have like a true dictatorship, like they had in Mexico before the Mexican Revolution, you're never really going to have that pure representative of capital to take on in any kind of like parliamentary system.
Yep.
Even if they're in the same party.
I was actually thinking about that for like why we keep on getting stuck with like, you know, people call it tepid social democracy or whatever, but I actually do think like in the case of the United States, you do have the factions of capital are effectively split, and it makes it look like one is more progressive. I mean, one is more progressive than the other, but like it makes it seem like there isn't, like they aren't both factions of capital when like, I mean, let's look at the way the Democrats work. They clearly are. Like they're subject to like they share the values of finance capital largely, and then a weirdly coalition of like petite bourgeois shit. So like, and educational institutions and stuff that's you know, servicing capital, and then like
high tech as well. They're Silicon Valley too, aren't they?
Right. As opposed to like traditional Sunbelt industries and like, you know, but it's pretty clear what's going on there. And Marx, I mean, Engels was really worried about that in America. Like he was always writing about how like that plus currency schemes plus the like yeoman fascination would make it very hard for there to ever be a workers' party there that got anywhere. So even though one of the first labor parties was actually attempted in the U.S., it just didn't last.
What do you call it? So the Democratic Party, they're basically like the party of monopoly rents. Is that what we're saying? They're the party of finance and people who can get patents. And then the Republicans are more the party of production and real estate, but that's a rent. Are Democrats real estate?
No, well, they're both real estate, actually. I mean, in California, Democrats are heavily into real estate, but
the whole economy is rents out here. I mean, there's some production, it's true, but there's a lot of rent activity, so it's more divisions between types of rentiers than it is like the rent party nowadays versus the production party.
Right. I mean, it probably was the production party versus the rent party at one point. Also, the Democrats were the party. I mean, the Democrats were the party of what originally?
Production, really, weren't they?
No, the Democrats were the party of slavery and of decentralized order. Like the Democrat Republicans were, and I mean when the Whigs totally bombed out in the second party period in the United States, like. For a while, they pretty much were the only party, and they split, sort of. I mean, they sort of, like, they split and reabsorbed the Whigs, and that's where the Republicans come from, because that's the way but, anyway, I mean, like, you see this over and over again, though, where, like, it looks like it looks like one of the parties is more progressive, and thus there's, like, socialists have an ally in government, but they clearly don't and can't. Like...
I just wanted to add that I was thinking about monarchic systems and how this antagonism manifests itself. And it really manifests itself in the way of court intrigue, right? So even in a monarchic system, you're going to have people say like, this minister or this courtier is the progressive one. Maybe we can ally with them, right? Like we see that in the Russian Revolution, the development of the Russian Revolution. So this problem is never entirely eliminated, even in a monarchic capitalist order.
Yeah, I was just gonna. Oh, so go ahead, Emmanuel.
Yeah, to sort of bring the discussion back to this paragraph a little bit. What really struck me as truth was how snarky Marx is against like really existing socialists. that like the socialists are like, why, we're on their side. All we want is, universal health care, and the bourgeoisie was for that. That's not a socialist idea. That's a liberal idea. And, why are the bourgeoisie always fighting against us on what should be, follow naturally from, or even implement the exact same policies that they did just literally 2 years ago? Why are they fighting against us? And Mark's making the point that, goddamn socialists, like, the bourgeoisie understands why you have to be inconsistent, like, or intellectually inconsistent, and why you're the enemy, but you don't understand, who the real enemy is here. I just thought that was kind of very, very apt, and also like how socialism, like that socialism, how that was already a slur when this was written, and for the exact same reasons. I mean, when I read this, I was just like, it actually frightened me, because I was immediately struck by like a very sort of apocalyptic feeling, or like nihilist feeling, that like nothing has happened. Like, this is still the best take on contemporary politics, or even like last week's politics in country X. And
but I don't think I don't think this take, if we were alive in 1920, we wouldn't think that it was describing 1920s politics. Yeah, so we gotta.
Oh well, yeah. I mean,
revolutionary politics was alive, so we shouldn't think that from 1848 to today, it's like that. Our political cycle has reverted back to a social democratic 1848.
Well, social democracy was huge in the 1920s as well.
Yeah, but so was revolutionary stuff. That
not in any core capitalist country on earth. No, it wasn't. Like it.
Well, they had revolutions, Derek.
And they
also,
they
I would push back on you a little bit on that, Tom, because even if that were true, true. even if, well, all right, fine. Let's, for the sake of argument, I'm accepting that proposition. But like, even those revolutionary movements, like what he talks about here about how can you ban debate when you're supposed to be council driven or whatever? There's still a lot in this this paragraph that would apply to those revolutionary movements as well.
Fair enough. But I just feel like I feel like that our political moment in the West, right now, is very much kind of like this period. It feels like this periodization, where like if you were to go to 1920s, 30s in Europe, it wouldn't feel like the political situation mapped so neatly onto this. That's my point.
I mean,
that I do agree with.
I agree with you with some interesting things about the kinds of socialism he's condemning here, because we're focusing on like the standard bourgeois one, but the other one I found interesting is trying to keep the classes together, because that's true in all of them, including the USSR, because of the nature of the peasant petty proprietor relationships. I mean, like, it leads to debates between Bukharin and Trotsky. Like, it's already there, even there. And that, like, oh my God, if you're talking about even if you think China is somehow actually socialist, or I mean, maybe socialist transitioning or something like that, like, you want to talk about class collaborationist politics, like explicitly? I mean,
it's in the flag.
Yeah, it's literally in the like
the block of four classes was, it's like
the mass line argument is a class collaborationist argument. Like,
yeah, but the mass line at least has this appeal to the people or something, and not not literally being like, we actually need to represent a section of the bourgeoisie. Like the Rousseauian people is more vague about it, I guess. And like, that's superior in a way, because if you just do numbers, the people or something is not like, it's not like, listen, we have to make sure the local bourgeoisie gets a cut. Anyway.
Right.
I just have to say that, you know, the one movement that is kind of consistent on this, not anywhere near consistent with capital C, but at least kind of consistent, more consistent than the general debate, is like hardcore libertarians, because they will call out bailouts as socialism, and like you know, corporate welfare, blah blah blah, as socialism. The military-industrial complex, that's socialism.
Right, Keynesianism.
But Manuel, do you ever hear them talking about like hoses, water hoses? They never mention the water. They leave out the water hose always. They never mention hydrants either.
That's not true, Tom. That's not true. They do talk about that. They actually do talk about privatizing fire emergency services.
Yeah,
that does come up, but
that's
that's
the actual history of that in the U.S. too. Like, we used to
that's kind of fringe though, and what isn't fringe was
granted.
Romney Care is communism. You know, like that ended up being a real thing. And
wait, for real?
Well, you know, Romney Care, you know, the individual mandate, private public partnership healthcare system with a public option, right? That Romney pitched in Massachusetts as a sort of centrist, you know, Republican way of, I think it was was it Cato Institute that came up with this, or the Rand Corporation?
Enterprise Institute, not the Cato.
Excuse me.
Heritage. It was Heritage, yeah.
Heritage.
Holy shit, so it's even worse.
Well,
oh my God.
So this Heritage Foundation healthcare proposal that was implemented by a Republican governor was picked up as the Democratic alternative to actual universal health care.
It's not Romney Care. Romney Care is
right.
Romney Care.
That's why I said Romney Care at first, is because once you call it Obamacare, it's socialism now, right? But yeah.
Like when Trump said he was gonna do some kind of UBI-ish thing, and I'm like, why aren't Republicans all over this? Like, that's socialism. Like,
yeah, no, I was just going to say, sorry, I was just going to build off a few points that have been made. It's in the UK, it's such an obfuscation because of the role that the Labour Party plays. And we're seeing it now in the context of COVID-19 that, you know, landlords here can apply for a mortgage holiday, and yet renters are not in any way being protected. So that should be a logical position for the Labour Party to defend. And yet they're not, they're just moving to defer it. And they're still seeing, Starmer was like in the Telegraph last week, and I took a load of screen grabs of like Telegraph subscribers going like, I've cancelled my subscription, there are communists in the Telegraph. So you have, you know, a party of bourgeois liberalism who aren't even protecting what should be some of their, you know, core demographic voters, still being perceived within that society to be like, you know, communists. Is completely insane.
Well, I think it's quite good because it allows people to actually become communists. Because if they see if you're even going to be milquetoast, you're going to be called a communist. It's like, I do think genuinely people will just go, right, I'm a fucking communist. And I do think, I wonder, is there some of that? Is that something that we will see happening in society? As like, because to be honest with you, when I was in college growing up, you know, in the 90s in Ireland or something, I swear to Jesus, I never heard the word socialism. You know, I never heard it. I remember I was in Hyde Park in like 2008 with my mate who came over. He liked to go into Speaker's Corner, and he was like, there was a Marxist guy there, a trot, and he was talking about like socialism, and my mate was arguing with him, and I was kind of going to myself, what's socialism? I don't know what that is. I'm literally about 12 years ago. Like, so I don't know. Maybe there's something to it. What do people think?
Well, I think, well, I'll say what I was saying somewhere else. That I think this is actually why parlor Stalinism is coming back more than like a consistent socialism, because if you're trying to freak out people who are calling you commies, you just go find the obvious historical model for who these people are comparing you to. And so, you know, who you're going to look at, you're going to look, you know, if you're right wing, if you're slightly right wing inclined at all, you're going to look towards Nazism. If you're slightly left wing inclined at all, you're going to look towards the historical high period anti-revisionist communism. And we've seen that happen twice in the United States, where that kind of flows up as a meme. It lasts for about 5 years and dies. It doesn't lead to a real movement.
No, that's true. That's true. That is true. But I'm, you know, I do think I don't know. I know in the private chat there, you're saying I need to curb my enthusiasm or opportunism. I'm not being opportunist. What are you on about?
I was making a joke because it doesn't seem like you're actually being I don't think you're actually being opportunistic, Tom. But I do think there is a certain amount of look, if we can only people were really telling me the other day, or not the other day, like before COVID hit, but right after Bernie lost in that 2-week period, that we needed to all rush into the DSA, and then turn it communist, because now we've taught them that electoralism doesn't work the way they think, and now we have to turn it into a mass workers' party. Now, and interesting, the DSA's numbers have grown for the first time in 2 years, and I know that because of when they stopped reporting their numbers and when they picked it back up. So they haven't been reporting their numbers for 2 years, and then this month they reported in March they grew by 10K. Which they were at 66,000 members. But if you actually figure that out, the timeline, and looking at when they report it, means they had no growth and maybe declines in growth for the last 2 years. And I only bring that up because that's the kind of thinking that it leads to, is we can just rush in and we can do this really fast. And
yeah, well, that's obviously, rubbish, isn't it? There's no social base or anything. It's just the same answer again.
You're relying on the free play of the sign, that someone goes socialist, huh? And to be fair, this happened to me, that over time I went from I like libraries to, eventually distinguishing between, socialism as, liberal capitalist management to some kind of, a bespoke Marxian communist content or something, all because at first there was a word socialism that I engaged with. But that's not really dealing with the underlying thought patterns that brought me here. And the quality of the socialist commitment that you get by watering it down so much is questionable. That's a nice way to say it.
Yeah. I came from the opposite trajectory, whereas I was so into libertarian right-wing movements and the ideological consistency. I guess I realized that Locke's proviso on land was impossible, and then it broke my brain. And then I started looking into what was going to be the precursors to the housing crisis. And then within 3 years, I was some kind of weirdo Marxist. But most people don't operate under that consistency. Most people operate in their immediate interests. And so, I don't know what I'm getting on that, but it does seem to me like that can work, but it only works temporarily if there's nothing for it to really go into, how you would build a social base, what kind of principles would it have, etc. Otherwise, it does make it seem like Marx is just ranting at the hoi polloi all the time. Like what he's saying about other socialists, it's okay, Marx, we get it, but why do socialists always do that? What reason does it have that we degenerate so consistently in such similar ways for 200 years? If we do that, then what can we do about it? And that's more disturbing to me. I mean, that does lead me into analytic Marxist on one end, Frankfurt School thought on the other, where it's oh, it's all bad.
Yeah, but one thing I would say is that just looking at the kind of normie socialist lefty stuff that I listen to, and some more kind of radical stuff, say a lot of them are basically kind of going further after what happened with Corbyn and Sanders. A lot of them are. So the media that is very popular, even Chapo, listen to the stuff that your man Matt what's his man, Matt Christian, is it? That he's doing these vlogs on like, I think like dialectics or something, you know, talking about how you want to go and get grilled up or something. I don't know, some really insane kind of metaphor for, but like and things like the Trillbillies Workers Party, like popular podcast left wings, that the material conditions in them is moving what they say and what they're debating and thinking about, you know, to more along the lines of what we talk about. And you know, I think that is a sign of something within society probably changing, maybe going towards some of the more influential socialists thinking about socialism in a more Marxian than a social democratic trend. We might see more of it. I get that feeling that shift has occurred from the media that I consume in the last few months.
I think that's true to an extent, but just picking up on what Derek said about the DSA, I mean, there's something fairly analogous happening here in the Momentum, which was the organization that kind of existed as a organizational faction within the Labour Party, they've almost had like a refoundation. But once one group came forward saying, we will refound Momentum along these principles and lines, immediately a second and then a third group emerged. And it's really difficult when we have these conversations on this text. It kind of takes us back to McNair in so many ways, in that it's because they kind of think that, what we learned from the Corbyn period, we could take some of those lessons and we just need to do it again, but more. But then there's also kind of ideological disputes within what is already quite a small group that's splintering. And that's before you even take into context what we're discussing in terms of there not actually being a lot of the social base and a workers' movement to actually kind of catalyze any of that activity. So it's kind of frustrating to watch that happening kind of while we're discussing these things in the abstract. And it does lead to kind of, I don't know, senses of kind of fatalism within me.
Well, it's people caught up in political logic, going further into the political logic that we need. You know, we need exactly the right formation of what you call a momentum. If we just had momentum slightly betterly done, we'd have socialism in the UK. You know, yeah. It's a bad argument. Derek's probably gone off thinking I think the revolution's going to come. Derek is much too depressive about these type of things. Derek, you got to come to the light. Come to the light.
I'm a revolutionary pessimist, which at least I'm still revolutionary. I haven't gone full Adorno. I haven't wrote my version of resignation yet. If anyone has read that essay, you should, because it's when Adorno just basically says the only communism we're fighting for is in my head. Which
I thought you were going to say in my bed.
Yeah, well, you know, sure. Yeah. No, I have been. I am more pessimistic, only in so much that, like, when you study the patterns of the 20th century, we've been at this moment a couple of times. Like, we were at this moment between this like 65 and 75, and woo, did it not go well?
It didn't go well, but like the whole thing is like, if we think of like from, you know, the whatever you call it, the 1,000-year stare, or whatever people call it, it's like, you know, capitalism and the dynamics of it throws up these repeated problems, and generations try and strategize to fix it, and they fucked it up the first 3 or 4 cycles. But like the cycles are, I think, keep coming, and like, you know, it's not inevitable that you keep fucking up the same. You keep doing it wrong. It's not inevitable, or else what's the point?
Well, you know, this to me, this does lead me to think about like a lot of the ex-Marxist conservative critics of Marxism who kept on saying that, like, well, you get part of what you guys have wrong is you're not doing proper class analysis anymore. That's, you know, that's why a lot of the Italian Marxists became fascist, and a lot of the paleo conservatives who were coming out of Trotskyism are like, went similar ways with their managerial theories. And I do think like we have to, if we say there's a materialist explanation for this, we actually kind of have to look at that stuff and at least consider it, because it does seem like we are like, well, you know, we have a merger formula and a workers movement, but kinda, but it never, even when the workers movement had a real social base, the merger never really happened in a place where it should have. And that's why I'm more pessimistic, because there was supposed to be.
Did it not happen in Germany?
Yeah, no. Actually, here's what happened. Like the Sparks,
Communist Party, the Sparks,
yeah. The Sparks and the Social Democrats were effectively split the working class. I actually talked to a German scholar who said that I was misinterpreting some things. That I was wrong on some things, basically because I had my timeline premature, like that and one of the sources didn't tell me like when the communists were mostly like Catholic and unemployed. That actually wasn't how they originally started off, but it divided the working class up against itself pretty quickly, and also within factions within the Social Democratic movement, and that really can't be ignored. And then if you read somebody like Adam Perowski, it gets really dire when you start doing game theoretical calculus on this. When we brought this up before, but it does seem like there is a way this breaks down when you assume certain conditions that are assumable in parliamentary capitalistic democracies that we can't seem to get past. We haven't theorized a way out of it, and so we're likely to regress to the same things we've done before.
Right. And so it's looking at that regular sort of pattern situation, and, essentially looking for ways where one of those rules can be broken and we can have like a different calculus take hold, because there were situations where there was a merger of the workers' movement and the socialist intellectuals, and they led to, social democratic politics. Like, they didn't lead to revolutionary communism. And that's like, you have to be in a situation where that kind of social democracy it's not really plausibly going to deliver the goods while having workers' power in the way that they had some sort of economic say in society. Like, it's not hopeless. It's just, this is why we live in capitalism. Like, we have to reverse engineer why we're in capitalism before figuring out, the new strategy or something. It's only pessimistic because we live in the past, like everything else has to have not worked. That's why we're here.
Yeah, I'd be crazy surprised if in 20 years in somewhere like Britain or America there is not or France, there's not another at least a 1968 moment where in Paris, 1968 moment.
Look at the unemployment figures.
Yeah, but that's temporary. That's just temporary. I think it's more the political dynamics.
Oh, Tom.
No, okay, obviously, no. I'm not being facetious. I'm obviously being a bit facetious. I think you might end up with 5 to 10% unemployment.
I mean, we've never seen anything quite like this in modern memory, where the government basically inflicts that economic crisis on itself.
Well, the thing is,
how do you mean it inflicts it on itself?
Well, they didn't handle the thing straight, the proper right way.
Right, they didn't do.
No, but even countries who did are very affected.
Yeah, but they're not going to be as affected as the UK or America or
the fucking United States is going to be.
I mean, that remains to be seen.
Yes, you're right.
We live in a global economy.
I'm making a prediction.
Yeah,
well,
and if the purchasing power of the U.S. falls, I mean, that could hit South Korea very badly, who managed it perfectly. I mean, I think one should be very careful to say that countries who handled it very well will be better off than those who didn't, because
on average, it'll be better off.
On average, it will be better off in some metrics, yes, but like we live in a global economy. Is all I'm saying.
I'm aware of that. But I'm talking about the potential for unrest in the United States. Is like we were already in a tremendously cynical situation, and this is something else.
Well, but comparison.
I mean, when you guys can get access to guns, but you can't purchase toilet paper, I mean that says a lot of about the level of how much shit might be going down.
And the way employment figures are. I know it's very sui generis. It's something that that deep a slope, that negative a slope in employment figures. Just doesn't fucking happen, for the most part in American capitalist history.
We're not even looking at other countries that so we're talking about this. I want to bring up Russia for a second, and maybe
Russia.
Really make you put some pause on the stuff. The situation in Russia is that not only is COVID affecting them, but their oil subsidies for their entire government has been wiped out, and to keep their exports up, they're keeping the prices high in their own country. This is huge, and I'm not as optimistic as Tom, because I'm not, I don't work in the same sectors, but I think this is going to be really devastating for a much longer time than people think, because it's not just the service sector shutdown that's going to affect everyone. What worries me in the terms of this is historically the Social Democrats have been right in saying that mobilization of workers does not generally happen in an immiserated time, unless there is a fully developed socialist movement already there. It developed during better time periods to pick it up. I mean, and we kind of have that, but not really, and not en masse. It does seem like there's a real divide between the kind of people who do politics in all of our countries and the kind of people you would need for a workers' movement. There's a huge divide.
So basically what we're saying here is that we need a merger of not the socialist workers movement and not the socialists and the workers movement. We need a merger between the DSA and Marxist Center. Is this what we're saying? I think this is what we're saying.
100%. Obviously, I mean, when I think of we're the beating heart of the working classes.
We need a merger between the CPGB, PCC, and SWP. This is what we're saying.
And no, but you forgot. I don't know. Insert crank Maoist party here. You forgot the PSL, Tom.
Well, it is interesting to compare the formation of the first, and then we're really off topic, and we should get back on it. But to compare the formation of the first internationals and the second one, because the second one was coalitions of parties. There were socialist ideological parties, but the first international was a coalition of whatever fucking organization had workers in it, and the parties literally came from coalitions of unions that banded together to form political parties. In most countries, this seems to have been it doesn't seem possible for that to happen now. And so even the precursor movement, where you had this coalition and the first international that led the second international to actually have some legitimacy in claiming a relationship to merge with, that's really not there. And one of the things I got frustrated with, the more I've been studying since we did the McNair thing, and it's going to come up, and to me it's coming up in this, is that there's a skipping over the coalition of unions into the labor and social democratic parties, because we don't like the implications of where that politics went, but also because I think everybody really knows those really aren't there. And what's even more interesting about it is when that happened, those groups were illegal. So you can't even say it's totally the legal thing that's preventing it from happening. It's something else.
Okay. I think we should probably go offline. We're on about over 2 hours. Is there anything anybody wants to say before we wrap up? James, have you been wanting to get in or out there?
No, I was just going to say you were correct at the top when you said that it's quite a dense chapter, and that we've, as usual, kind of sprung off in many multiple directions. But yeah, no, it's been good conversation.
Definitely, we learned something about the hot dog scene in 1970s Sweden that we weren't really we weren't aware of. I must say, we were kind of surprised. Emmanuel, you pulled that one out.
I actually looked it up, and it was actually the 1950s. 50s and 60s, but still, yeah.
That's what I was thinking. That's why I was thrown. I was thinking, is that not the 1950s Swedish hot dog scene?
It was not the 70s.
Okay,
it was a bit earlier.
But you got to taste it side by side with a Big Mac. No, wait.
I did, but when I looked it up, it was actually under. It had actually been privatized by the time. They actually. How about that? They privatized the state-owned hamburger chain. That tells you a lot about Sweden in the 1990s. Man.
Disaster.
But yeah, I'm just gonna say it with all loving intent that Marx's point about parliamentary inaptitude and that they debated the railway for almost 2 years. Being a sign of why the parliament couldn't do anything could apply to a lot of this episode. And I say that with brotherly love for all of us and all of y'all, but still we got stuck on one paragraph for an hour and a half. Just saying.
Welcome.
Deal.
Welcome to the From Alpha to Omega Reading Group New Edition.
I mean, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. I mean,
when we started reading about politics, we went in a very ADD direction. But they, apparently communist parties, more than one in Central Europe, have listened to that series for advice on what to do, which is amazing. If you're listening right now, that's not a diss. That is I'm so I don't know what to say to that. You know what I mean? I don't feel like I have a lot of answers after reading a lot of this stuff. And, hopefully these stories lighten the mood while we're saying that, everything hasn't worked. There's no reason to despair just because that stuff didn't work. Something could work. We need something to work. We're humans. Life finds a way.
What we need is somebody traveling from the future, a revolutionary hero into our present, and mimics somebody who just got killed or something, and then starts a revolution. But to lighten the mood, I still have my.
Would you be referring to Captain Benjamin Sisko? Perhaps.
You mean Gabriel Bell?
Gabriel Bell, yes.
Yes.
I do have that bunga bunga joke to lighten the mood if anybody wants. Let's go off air before I get totally disowned. We're going into the dirtbag left. The dirtbag left. Here we come. Okay, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye.